Hello? Is there anyone out there? Can you guys hear me now? Is it working? Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm trapped in the Matrix. Never seen so many technical issues. Okay, we're finally back. Oh my god. Yeah, I see that. I see it's working now. Dude, I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going on. I have no idea what the fuck is happening. But, whatever.
True, or that they have a
Let's
right
watch
to say.
Philosophy Tube
Because
together.
the problem here is not the content of what is said, or the bare fact that it has been said, but the particular effects that the act of saying it in that way have. So you can see, for instance, there's a difference between saying something anti-Semitic at home and organising a
Real
fascist
Double
rally
H
through an
Alex.
area of London where a
What's
lot
up,
of Jewish
Double
people
H?
live. Although both are despicable and the ideas expressed might be the same, the effects
Double
that
H.
those two acts of speech have are very different.
Deeming.
Limitations on acts of political expression is nothing new. The right to free speech guarantees that governments will not persecute you for the content of your beliefs, but if I were to break into the House of Commons and make my criticisms of the British government very loudly with a lot of swearing, I would expect to be shut down. Because although we are all entitled to our views, we are not legally entitled
there's
to
Double
always
H.
express them in whatever manner we like without consequence. And fascist speech often has very interesting consequences. Suppose I say the sentence, "Today's Wednesday," and I say it all the time, every day, even when it isn't Wednesday, and I even today's Wednesday say today's Wednesday at times when it's completely in a today's Wednesday appropriate. If you're very clever, you might start to
Deeming.
suspect that I'm not really talking about the days of the week. Those are the words that I'm using, but I'm actually doing something else with them. Namely, I'm taking the piss out of you whilst you try and explain to me the days of the week. Well, a lot of fascist speech works in similar ways. The myths at the core of fascism, the bad statistics, the made-up history, the really off-the-wall stuff we'll be getting to later on, it doesn't really matter to a committed fascist how many times you sit down and debunk that stuff. They keep today's Wednesday saying today's Wednesday. That's because it's not so much about the content, but the act of saying it. And that's how we spot propaganda. The job of propaganda isn't necessarily to convince anyone. Propaganda is a recruitment tool. It gathers and retains the people who understand the true message.
Real lemony water. Funky lemon
What's
sheet.
up, Lemony?
It doesn't really matter to a committed white nationalist
Hello,
how many
Ruka.
times you sit down and debunk the ridiculous
Oh,
white
dear.
nationalist conspiracy that the world is secretly being taken over by Jews. Because when they say that,
Abigail's brother looks so young here, yeah.
they're saying that it's true. What they're saying is they want to persecute Jewish people. And their audience are all running around trying to explain the days of the week, saying, "Come on our talk show and explain your weird theory about the days of the week. Bring this idea to the free marketplace of ideas that we may debunk it." Whilst some of their audience are sitting there going, "Oh, I get it. Today's
We're watching
Wednesday."
Philosophy
The
Tube.
liberal love of free speech is a great thing, but it assumes that everybody's coming to the table in good faith and is willing to play the game, which fascists obviously aren't. That's why it is worth countering fascist arguments in order to try and reach potential recruits before they can, but
Real Megatron, real.
anti-fascists will try to deny fascist platforms, because when we interview fascists or we debate fascists, they're not really there for us. They're there for our audience. Whilst we're up there talking about the days of the week, there's a guy at the back of the lecture theatre handing out pamphlets about the Wednesday question. Another function that giving platforms to fascists serves is to make them appear normal, like this New York Times article from November 2017, which is a largely humanising profile of a neo-Nazi from Ohio. The desired effect, from the neo-Nazi point of view, is that people reading the article who are close to Nazi sympathisers but not all the way will feel more comfortable knowing that they can still love cats, metal music and pasta and be fascists, and being more comfortable with their proximity to fascism will therefore be inclined to get a little bolder and more public with it. Journalists may feel they're being neutral by writing pieces like this, but in fact, the decision to focus the article on a neo-Nazi's family life, rather than on the fact that, as will be demonstrated shortly, his political beliefs demand the genocide of millions of people,
is itself a political decision on the part of the author. Articles like this make fascism out as little more than a quirky alternative to the mainstream, which is how it sneaks under the radar of liberalism.
And fascists realised this long before anyone else did. Carl Schmitt, who you'll remember from the friend-enemy distinction in Section 3, said in 1922 that liberal societies, with their love of free speech, would allow the Nazis to freely undermine them from within and turn liberalism's own virtues against it. All they had to do was pretend to value free speech, and they could say, hey, what about our free speech? Why don't we get to come on the talk shows and stand up in Parliament and spread our propaganda, make our arguments? And turn liberalism against itself they did. Schmitt himself joined the Nazi Party, who, it then became obvious, didn't value free speech quite as much as they pretended to. Despite what classical liberals like John Stuart Mill said about truth always defeating error and falsehood in open rational debate, the historical evidence sadly just doesn't support that idea when it comes to fascism. Still though, somebody might say that even though fascists don't value free speech and only pretend to when it suits them, anti-fascists can't use that as a justification to shut them down. Because isn't that like saying that shooting people is bad and therefore we should shoot anybody who shoots people? Aren't you the real fascist if you shut down fascists? Well, this is just the same false equivalence that we examined earlier on, only it's been restated in a different skin. Like before, this ignores the ideological difference between anti-fascism and fascism, and it ignores the content-act distinction. It treats the tactic as separate from the politics behind the tactics. And that's just not how anti-fascists approach this issue. Remember, every political ideology is violent towards someone, shuts someone down, but the devil is in who and why. In Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, Mark Bray writes, "It's important to note that the vast majority of people who oppose limiting free speech on political grounds are not free speech absolutists. They all have their exceptions to the rule, whether obscenity, incitement to violence, copyright infringement, press censorship during wartime, or restrictions for the incarcerated. If we rephrase the terms of the debate by taking these exceptions into account,
the best.
we can see that many liberals support limiting the free speech of working class teens busted for drugs, but not limiting the speech of Nazis. Many are fine when the police quash the free speech of the undocumented by hunting them down, while they amplify the speech of the Klan by protecting them. They advocate curtailing ads for cigarettes, but not ads for white supremacy." One objection to anti-fascist stance on this might be that giving the government more power to shut down the free speech of some people arguably plays right into fascists' hands. And that's probably true, but it's not really what anti-fascists are after. Anti-fascist actors know
Really,
from
Abyss?
experience that liberal states and their police forces
Don't be so sour.
usually defend
We're all human
fascist
behind the
speech,
screen.
so there's not much use looking for help there. Because anarchists swim freely through the Antifa Ocean, empowering the state to tackle fascism is not usually what they're after.
Thanks for the
Rather,
follows.
goal is usually to enable communities to take a more direct approach, which they do.
Since it often appears in the news, it's worth briefly touching on free speech in universities and academic freedom. Firstly, academic freedom is not the same thing as freedom of speech. Academic freedom refers to
Thank you,
researchers
comrade.
and academics being free to investigate those topics that interest them and being able to publish their findings publicly without the government removing points of view it doesn't like. This has not always been allowed, even recently. The George W. Bush regime, for instance, attempted to prevent scientific evidence from being published that demonstrated, among many other things, that humans are contributing to climate change. The Eisenhower regime subpoenaed several academics, including school teachers, for un-American activities because of perceived left-wing sympathies. Academic freedom has nothing, in fact, to do with people outside of universities being guaranteed protected speaking engagements on campus. Neither free speech nor academic freedom guarantees anybody a platform or the freedom from consequences, criticism, or protest, which are themselves often forms of free speech.
Speaking of government's relationships to free speech, though, another thing that Bray illustrates is that anti-fascists are probably actually more in favour of free speech than a lot of people realise, and even more than a lot of liberals are. We tend, I think, to assume that countries like the USA and the UK allow everybody free speech at the moment, and that anti-fascists are trying to chip away at that, but that's not quite true. Western governments do restrict free speech for all kinds of reasons. For instance, undocumented immigrants and prisoners have huge curtailments on their free speech, which anti-authoritarians, many of whom also swim freely through the Antifa Ocean, would oppose. And of course, we know that if you have a lot of money, you can make your free speech go a lot further than somebody else's. Bray also writes, "The false assumption that the United States maximizes free speech rests on the unstated fact that this right only applies to non-incarcerated citizens. Therefore, millions of people in the United States are deprived of the elements of this freedom. In contrast, anti-authoritarians seek to abolish prisons, states, and the very notion of citizenship, thereby eliminating this black hole of rightlessness. They also aim to construct a classless, post-capitalist society that would eradicate significant discrepancies in our ability to make our speech meaningful. Many will argue that this is simply impossible. Even if that were true, however, what is at issue here are the values being espoused, not their likelihood of being enacted. Pundits attack Antifa for being anti-free speech, yet even if you agree that shutting down fascist organising constitutes an infringement upon the free speech of fascists, it is still patently obvious that anti-fascists advocate for far more speech in society than liberals, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Today's anti-fascists want to shut down today's fascists, whereas today's fascists, well, let's take a look.
Part 5. There is no peaceful white nationalism.
You're such a sweetie.
Contemporary Euro-American
Information thanks for the heart, me.
leans hard on white supremacy, so let's talk about that. One thing that modern fascists are very good at is marketing, and that's because they know their audience. They know that if anti-fascists shut them down, liberals might be inclined to take their side, and they increase their chances of that happening if they can lie by marketing themselves as peaceful. By now, we've seen that words like peaceful and violent are somewhat politically looser than we might have initially supposed, but fascists will do whatever they can to appear peaceful specifically in the eyes of liberals. White
Thanks for the follow.
supremacists will rebrand themselves as white nationalists, white identitarians, white civil rights activists, or alternative ethno-nationalists, or the alt-right, finger quotes everywhere.
such a
They'll do
sweetie.
sneaky things occasionally, like denounce the Nazis or denounce the KKK. They won't call it a white supremacist
Thanks for the heart,
rally.
me.
They'll call it a free speech rally or a march against communism. They don't call it the Seattle White Nationalist Convention. They call it the Northwest Forum. They'll say things like, "We just want peaceful relocation of people of colour, not genocide." Or they'll say, "Other races have an ethno-state, why can't white people?" Or they'll say, "Black people are proud to be black, aren't you proud to be white? Do you hate your own people?" Don't fall for it. It's a ruse. White nationalism as an idea can only be established through racist violence and ultimately through genocide, and I'm going to prove that for you right now. We established earlier on that every political ideology legitimizes violence against somebody, but the devil is in who and why. So, let's pop the hood and see who is on contemporary fascism's hit list and why. The why is easy. At the core of white supremacy, or whatever name they try and use to sell you on it today, is the myth of white genocide. White genocide
It was
is
the
a
dog
conspiracy
whistles.
theory
Oh,
which
you're
says
such a
that the
sweetie.
immigration of people of colour and interracial relationships are leading to the extinction of white people. Furthermore, though they often won't say this bit openly, this genocide is supposedly being orchestrated deliberately by the Jews, or globalists, which is often just a euphemism for Jews. It's a scenario that's no less ridiculous now than it was 120 years ago when it was invented by American racists and then it got picked up by the Nazis. White people are not going to go extinct anytime soon. Demographic change is not the same thing as genocide, and it should go without saying that it's not being orchestrated by Jews. And you might well wonder how anybody could ever believe that. Well, they'll use all kinds of tactics to try and sell you on it. Sometimes they'll rebrand the white genocide myth and call it something like the Great Replacement. They'll try and feed you all kinds of dodgy statistics about immigration rates, birth rates, crime rates, IQs. They'll talk about the cultural incompatibility of immigrants. They'll say they're not racists, they're just race realists. The idea that nationality is somehow tied to race is something that you can find traces of, often even in quite mainstream discourse. A skinhead Nazi ranting about how Jews are trying to take over the world and kill all the white people probably isn't going to persuade many. But a clean-cut Harvard graduate in a suit appears on the evening news and tells you that wealthy elites and globalists, they're bringing in all these immigrants whose cultures just aren't compatible with our Western values. And 6 months down the line, everyone's going, whoa, where did all these Nazis come from? One thing they love doing is assuming without evidence that current data trends will continue decades and even centuries into the future. That way they can say, oh, look at all these immigrants coming here and having kids. If this keeps up, a very dodgy assumption, even if the data they give you is real, then you'll be a minority in your own country by 20 whatever. Note how that not only contains that very dodgy statistical assumption, but also the structure of that sentence already draws a line between you and whoever the supposed new majority will be, which rules out the possibility that together you might form something better. YouTube's own Sean does great work debunking the ways white nationalists lie about statistics in order to try and sell you on this white genocide conspiracy theory. I thoroughly recommend his work. Recall what we said earlier on about propaganda and how it doesn't really matter that it's false? Remember, the goal is, if not to fool you, then at least get you to repeat the message without realizing what it is. So they'll say that they want to prevent white genocide and peacefully build a white ethno-state. That's the why of the violence, so who's the who? Well, here's the key to figuring that one out. Barack Obama is a black man, despite the fact that he had one white parent and one black parent. Mixed-race children, nowadays, are not considered white, and that's going to have some big implications.
Interestingly, this wasn't always the case. It used to be that if you had one white parent, you were white. The boundaries of whiteness have shifted a huge amount over the last few centuries and varied from place to place. In fact, it wasn't until around the turn of the 19th century that the so-called one-drop rule came into effect. States like Tennessee and Virginia started saying that if you had one drop of blood in you from a person of colour in your ancestry, you couldn't be called white anymore. These new laws were in part designed to prevent former slaves and their descendants from enjoying the full benefits of whiteness, and to keep them in poverty by preventing them from marrying into white families, mixed marriages being at that time largely illegal. They were also designed to keep immigrants out of the USA. Courts and legislators literally invented whole racial
I just wanted to pause real quick. Unbeknownst said on Twitch, the craziest part to me is people who don't kick because they'll make everything quote-unquote cheaper. I don't think we should believe those people anymore. I don't believe anyone who tells me that they voted for Trump because he would make things cheaper or whatever. I don't buy into that anymore. Because we had 4 years for people to figure out what he stood for, and we had 4 years before that when he was in office. Like, we know what he stands for. We know what he says. He's been saying this stuff day in and day out. I don't believe you if you want to make claims that
Some weird mail.
you voted for him because he would make things cheaper. You believe in other things, either subconsciously or very consciously, but secretly. But you're not coming to the table showing your cards. You're lying. They're hiding behind that, right? Like, it's a constant thing, and you see it all the time. It's, once again, like, it's purposefully done so that you argue with them. They want you to argue. Like, it just platforms them more because they'll eventually get to the things that they really believe in, and sometimes they'll come right out with it. Like, we had a few comments on my video before last where someone was like, tell me why I should care about trans rights and immigrants and whatever. All I care about is for being able to afford a house and buying groceries. I don't care about that stuff. No one has yet to explain to me why I should care. No one has yet to explain to them why they should have empathy. So at the end of the day, like, at least that person came right out with it. But I guarantee you, if you press these people who are claiming that they voted for him for groceries, whatever, they're gonna eventually admit that they literally don't care. And they would rather sacrifice other people. So I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It's a half truth that they're throwing out there. They're pretending that all they cared about was prices. Like, get the fuck out of here, man. Like, that's not true. There's no way. Like, yeah, they genuinely either have zero empathy or they, and I've talked about this before. Like, I honestly believe that a large portion of the population, because it's already been shown, like, there's a large portion of the population that does not have an inner voice in their head. Like, when they read something, they don't hear anything. They don't hear a voice reading the text in their head. They don't think, there's no thought back and forth in their head. There's nothing there. Like, I don't understand. But now I do. Now I understand. I get it now. The election results really show. But no, more importantly, let's get back to the video.
Categories just to establish that would-be immigrants weren't white, since at that time you had to be if you wanted to come into the country. A shift in the way whiteness is defined also reflected the growing popularity of eugenics, the pseudo-scientific myth that good social things happen if you sterilize or exterminate people of color and people with disabilities in
One more thing. I don't think that that's the problem. I don't think it's the people not having inner voices. Probably something more to that. That's brain science. It's beyond me. What I think is happening in reality is we just went through a pandemic. A lot of kids had terrible schooling. I mean, if I had the option to, like, get schooled from home on a webcam, like, the amount of, like, not learning I'd be doing, because I would be playing video games in the background the whole time if I was a kid. I'm sorry. There's so many kids that learn jack shit, and they got all their information from podcasts. They got all their information from message boards and memes, and video games and game chat, and we know how toxic the gamer community is. Like, I honestly think that, like, there's a large amount of kids that just grew up on Galaxy Gas, and this is who voted. And they just sucked up propaganda. It's just so easy to them to grab. Like, anyways, moving on.
To control whose genes enter society. With eugenics, whiteness became even narrower. White nationalists, including the Nazis, began to define their people, or Volk, as excluding not just all people of colour, but people with disabilities, LGBT people, Jews, and so on. Incidentally, although the Nazis are the most infamous practitioners of eugenics and legalised racism, they were inspired by eugenicist racist laws that were passed and widely used
for the golden
in the
bean
USA for decades before the Nazis even got close to power.
So, whiteness wasn't always recessive, but laws that were designed to keep people
for the
of colour
W's.
down after emancipation and the myth of eugenics mean that even after most of these laws have been struck from the books, we have inherited in the modern age this classification of whiteness as recessive. How does this help us find who is on contemporary fascism's hit list? Well, fascists say that one of the big causes of white genocide is the immigration of people of colour. So let's say that we hypothetically stopped all...
It's a slippery slope. Yes, Chavos, but it's way more harmless to say such things about IQ tests for votes, than the actual eugenic rhetoric that the right. Right, they're not just spreading it, they're enacting it, No one was ever going to seriously enact IQ tests for votes. So this whole Bayside shit is not even remotely accurate, especially in that scenario. And it usually never is. Anytime someone says, well, both sides, get the fuck out of here. First of all, yes, liberals are in the middle, centrist right, the right of center. So they're not really both sides. They're both the same side if you're talking about Democrats and Republicans. But if we're talking about the left is not. Then the left is the opposite of the right. It's a line, right? It's a line from left to right. It's not a fish hook. It's not a serpent. It doesn't loop back around. Like it's a line. And I don't know, this whole both sides thing, we've got to drop it. It's not productive at all. It's like fucking splitting what division, right? Where do I fall on the political spectrum? Extremely left. Anyways, moving on, let's keep watching the video.
Immigration of people of colour to a particular country, say the United States. Obviously that would be horrifically racist and immoral, but generously setting that aside, it also wouldn't actually work to achieve the goal that the fascist wants. Because what about all the people of colour who already live there? Mixed-race children in the modern age do not count as white,
Tokyo theory has its own issues, but, like, yeah, it can kind of mostly apply, but, like, it's still a lie at the end of the day. It's still always going to be a line from left to right. Like, we've got to stop trying to overcomplicate it. And plus, like, once again, like, non-productive conversations. Just, we can go back and forth. The only, like, back to what you said, Chabot, the only diversion that's going on is, like, just infighting amongst the left. We literally just argue and debate with fascists all day and platform them while they collect our own audience. And that's the point of this. That's the point of the video. That's the point of what we're talking about. Like let's focus on the real enemy.
So the proportion of mixed race people compared to white people is still increasing. White genocide is still happening. Of course, it isn't genocide, it's...
When we end the video, 1 minute, not 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 minute. So, like, that video I uploaded today, I'm quoting this video worth the wait. This video is called The Philosophy of Antifa. Worth watching. We watched most of it together now. I feel a lot to be tube.
Just demographics changing over centuries as a result of how we choose to construct
Thanks for the follow.
But according to the fascist, that's some kind of Jewish plot. So what can they do? Well, they have to pass laws against interracial relationships. But I mean, that ain't gonna work. People are still gonna fall in love, people are still gonna have sex and produce mixed race babies, so they've got to segregate the races, keep them separate, and make sure nobody's having sex with anyone they're not supposed to. And remember, ideology has to be enforced with violence, so the police have to start enforcing it. That means things like compulsory terminations for mixed race pregnancies, forced sterilization, punishments for people who are convicted of racial pollution. But wait, there's more. People still find ways around segregation, so it has to be enforced more strictly until it becomes ghettoization. We know from history that separate but equal doesn't happen. But people sneak out of ghettos too, so they need to be removed even further away and remanded to camps where they can be watched. Or deported. The Nazis had a vague idea to deport all Jews or people they considered Jews to Madagascar in the hopes that they would just die there or on the way, but it turns out that deporting and persecuting millions of people makes you quite unpopular with other countries. The Nazis actually began with voluntary, peaceful deportation.
Real easy,
which weren't
hours.
voluntary or peaceful, because Jews were being either forced to flee by vigilante violence that the state allowed or stirred up, or were being deported, which is to say arrested, imprisoned, and subjected to violence directly by the state. And what if they won't go, or can't go, to the internment camps, or wherever it is the fascist plans to deport them to? It's a big job. Remember, we're talking about every single person of colour in the country. In fact, more than that, because remember, whiteness is defined as even narrower than that. They've got to be rounded up, they're going to try to come back, or escape, or return illegally. And in the end, the only way to be 100% sure that white genocide can't happen, which it isn't, remember, it's a conspiracy theory that demographic change is somehow a plot by Jews, is with extermination. Real genocide. Because whiteness is defined as one-drop recessive, contemporary white supremacist fascism defines the very existence of people of colour as a threat.
What's up, ETG?
All of them. This is not a slippery slope argument. This is the built-in conclusion of contemporary fascism. If left unchecked, it leads inexorably to total racist violence and genocide. And the historical evidence is the final proof. In fact, it must lead there. Its own internal logic demands it. The who is at least everyone who isn't white. That's why appeasement was doomed to fail. That's why there is no peaceful white nationalism, there is no peaceful white supremacy, there are no peaceful Nazis. Fascism is not simply an alternative political viewpoint that one can hold. It is, in fact, incompatible with the existence of most human beings on Earth. Which is why it meets with such resistance. To people who haven't followed the white nationalist rabbit and who haven't really investigated why contemporary fascists think what they do, anti-fascist action can appear to come out of nowhere and be disproportionate. But now you can see through them and you know what's at stake. You may still disagree with anti-fascist action, or in the spirit of being local and flexible you may agree sometimes and disagree others and reserve the right to change your mind, but at the very least you now understand the political philosophies that are in motion in your world today.
Conclusions.
A lot of people, I think, have this idea that politics is like a play. There's one lead actor, one stage, one script, a handful of other people playing smaller roles, and one audience. But actually, I think that politics is like a whole theatre festival. There's all sorts of shows with loads of casts, loads of actors, loads of audiences, some of which overlap. Some of them are really big and famous, and some of them are tiny. Some of them aren't pitched at you, and some of them are just weird and incomprehensible, like that one guy at the Edinburgh Fringe every year who just stands on a street corner dressed as the Predator, and that's his whole show. Some of the shows in the theatre festival probably aren't very good, and there's a whole army of people whose job it is to run the theatre festival and tell you what to think, and a lot of what they produce isn't very good either. If you want to know whether a show you just saw was good, you've got to ask yourself, what is it doing? Not what it says on the flyer, not what do the big official reviewers say about it, but by the content of the show and the effects it has on its audience, both intentional and unintentional, what is actually being done here. And in political terms, what it means is we've got to understand ideology and action, theory and praxis. Hopefully, having seen this video, you're on your way, or at the very least, hopefully you realise now that the theatres of politics can accommodate very many different kinds of show.
If you liked this video, I have a tip jar at paypal.me/philosophytube. Think of it like me putting a hat round at the end of the lecture. Patreon.com/philosophytube is where you could make a regular donation to help me pay rent, afford food, and keep giving away free philosophy education.
Highly recommend Philosophy too. Anyways, how are you guys doing today? Chapels, I think you are being way too overly cautious of the left. You know what the right stands for. The left is the opposite of that. More philosophy too? Okay, I suppose we can do a little bit more. Let's see.
Catch
This one's pretty good.
video ad-free and uncensored only on Nebula. It's a hell of a time to be a lawyer.
It's the same person.
The Supreme Court is embroiled in corruption scandals. The British government wants judges to ignore the European Court of Human Rights. 2 prime ministers and 1 home secretary broke the law whilst in office, and 1 former president has been indicted. It is a hell of a time to be a lawyer. Fortunately, I'm a hell of a lawyer. Hi, my name's Trixie Mephistopheles from the law firm Beelzebub, and Jones. My services cost $500 an hour. And I'm also a lawyer. The law can do a lot of good, protect the vulnerable, give justice to the wronged. It can also do a lot of bad, intimidate, silence, bully, rob, destroy. As a demon, that's why I like it. But quite apart from the law's effects, there's also the question of what it is. If certain people can just ignore it, why have it there? In England,
I have not, Ollie.
less than 2% of
I've seen excerpts,
result in charges.
but I haven't seen
And
it
that law
full
goes
through.
unenforced 98% of the time. What even is the law? The question of what law is pretty important because it has an immediate bearing on whether we ought to obey it. For example, let's say the law is an expression of God's will.
I'm gonna grab some water.
Exists, it's a good idea to do what they say, or you could find yourself renting an apartment in hell, where the landlords are almost as bad as London. On the other hand, if the law is made up on the spot by the powerful, then perhaps we have a reason to be naughty. Let's try a couple of theories, just to get warmed up. Let's say the law is an expression of morality. There's good and there's evil, and the law just writes it down. But there must be more to it than that, because sometimes the law can make us do things that are immoral. For example, racial segregation used to be enforced by law. And sometimes the law doesn't seem to have anything to do with morality whatsoever. For example, pirating academic textbooks. Illegal, yes. Immoral? Well, you'd better hope not. Let's try again. Say the law is a prediction. If you do certain crimes, there will be certain consequences. But as we've already noted, often there are no consequences for breaking the law. In fact, most reported crimes go unsolved. If your employer or your landlord broke the law in their treatment of you, could you afford a lawyer to inflict consequences? Probably not. Definitely not if it's me. But the threat of consequences is usually enough to keep people in line. Let's try that then. The law is a command. This was the opinion of English philosopher John Austin. He said that laws are expressions of desire on the part of a sovereign, like a king or parliament, that people behave in certain ways. Those desires come to us in the form of a command backed up by a threat of force. Moreover, Austin said that laws are general commands. Kneel down. Bend over. Put on these cat ears. Those are commands. They are expressions of desire. And they are backed up by a threat of force. But they only apply to a specific person, time, and place. Laws, on the other hand, are general. They apply over a wide range of circumstances, people, and times.
Laws, or rules, properly so called, are a species of commands. A command is distinguished from other significations of desire, not by the style in which the desire is signified, but by the power and the purpose of the party commanding to inflict an evil or pain in case the desire be disregarded. If you are able and willing to harm me in case I comply not with your wish, the expression of your wish amounts to a command, although you are prompted by a spirit of policy to utter it in the shape of a request.
Austin's theory has some problems, though, some of which we've already mentioned. What is international law under this framework? Not much of a threat of force backing that up, so is it not real law? If an army invaded your country and started giving general commands for the population backed up by a threat of force, would that count as valid law? Austin's theory is a classic, but it's remembered these days more for being a good try than actually making sense. Kind of like the fourth Indiana Jones film. Solid effort, but nobody's favorite. Perhaps we should be systematic, rather than stabbing in the dark. The philosopher Joseph Raz says there are broadly 3 approaches for trying to define law, and the first is to check the dictionary. So, according to the Encyclopedic Textbook of American Law, the law is defined as access to the Encyclopedic Textbook of American Law can be purchased for $400 an hour. Damn it! The second is to ask a lawyer. And I could do it myself, but I happen to know a human lawyer who owes me a favor. Once upon a time, I gave him 7 years of fame, fortune, and dashing good looks, and he gave me his soul. So please welcome Devin from the channel Legal Eagle. Oh, Devin!
Yes, Trixie, what is it?
What is the law?
This isn't even legal advice. There is no accepted definition of what the law is or is not, even among...
How can you protect your trans friends you are afraid for their safety? Good question. You don't have any trans friends anymore. Your friends have always been cis. You don't know anything about anyone being trans. You don't know where any trans people live. If anyone asks you, you don't know. No idea. Financially support them is the answer, right? Financially support them. If they need help escaping to a blue state or to another country, whatever you can get them, help them out. Help them get somewhere safe. Talk to them, especially right now. As a trans person, since the election, not a single person has reached out to me and asked me if I'm okay. There's been people within my community online that have, but no one in real life has. My old friends, my exes, my family, nobody. No one asked me. Right? That hurts. a lot, if I'm being honest. And that's the one thing, like, I want you to consider. If you have friends that are trans, you know, don't assume they're gonna do anything. First of all, like, we gotta get away from, like, the whole, trans people are in danger, or of sorrow for themselves or whatever. That's such a stupid trope. And it's kind of a dangerous trope to spread. But what you should do is be like, hey, how you doing? What's up? Let's hang out. I don't fucking know, man. Just reach out to them, that's all. That's all you need to do. Reach out to them. And if they're feeling a type of way, I'm sure they'll open up to you. But, in this time, just reach out. That's all you gotta do. Really all you gotta do. It's a bare minimum. And if you can, and if they need more support or whatever, if they know what to do, just work with them. Help figure out a plan. These next 30, 50 years will be pretty crazy.
Lawyers. I mean, if you ask a normal person, you're probably going to get an answer like it is the things that the legislature passes, the bills that then become law and then govern a certain given population. But if you ask a lawyer, they'll probably get even more granular, and they'll explain that while there are these statutes that are passed by a legislature, a government, there's also the Constitution, as well as the judge-made law. At least in the United States, we have a whole corpus of jurisprudence that is not passed by a particular Congress, but it is created in the common law as cases come before a court. The courts will then decide different things and fill in some of the gaps that are left by the laws themselves, or at least the statutes that have been passed. But then, obviously that doesn't include.
Yo, you know what we need right now? We need a Sean video. When is Sean gonna upload a new video? I just realized that. It's been so long. What is Sean up to? Where are you, Sean? The last upload was 8 months ago. They're Palestine. 8 months? It's been 8. Did he get in trouble? How did he get in trouble? I don't think he got in trouble. Ain't no way. That's really been 8 months, dude? Bro, he shows up every year. He needs to show up now. No, I don't think he got into trouble, because literally Philosophy Tube was just talking about them, because Philosophy Tube did a video about J.K. Rowling. It was like, yo, go check out. Tell them they've already done this in depth. But yeah, I don't think anything recently happened. But I don't know. Who knows? Who fucking knows? 8 months since it uploaded. It's crazy. It takes its time, though. So I get it. I get it. I wonder. And I wonder if you know what it means to find your dream. Anyways, guys, I've got to get dinner sorted out, if I'm being honest. Definitely go watch more Philosophy Tube. And we'll do more of this. We'll probably watch more tonight. But I need to get food. I'm starved. I'm starving. So I will be back. Soon. When will then be now?
My friend Maddie.
Soon. Please join the community. Join the Discord. !Discord. Get a QR code for the Discord. Take a screenshot. Take it home with you. It'll last longer. Love you guys. And I will see you in like a couple hours, maybe? You know what I mean? Dang it, maybe we'll play some more video games. I don't fucking know. But I just want to talk. I just want to talk tonight. We've only got until December 2nd to really hammer out some good combos, so we'll just keep it chill. We'll do some more viewing parties. But yeah, see ya. What is the button?
We came here tonight to
There it is.
give you
So before we leave, we got to lift you higher than you ever been before. Forget roof, cause the world on fire, the girl on fire. Get loose, get loose, get loose, come on. Get loose, get loose, get loose, come on. Get loose, get loose, get loose, come on. Get loose, get loose, get loose, come on.
We're off to cross you against the wall, waiting there for more. Won't give a single dance, seen it all before. But one day you'll find you should lose your mind, you can waste self-control. Intoxicate yourself, get out on the floor.
She might let you get a peek like a booth for 40 deuce. Knew the D make a free, she looking for an excuse to get loose. Match the purse with the shoes, come on. It's big game, can she leave it with you? Yeah, right. The said boost with the juice, spit the truth, come on. And get loose, get loose, get loose, come on. Now you might have a shot in the dark if you play your cards right. If not, it's a long, hard night. Now, what can you say to get her to leave with you? Got her in your sight, you a heat-seeking missile. Spot her in the light, you wish you could be alone. Music in the back, act like a theme song. You hate how it all sound like a ringtone.